Hello and welcome back to the Bird's Eye View podcast. We are making a habit out of for recording these emergency or reaction pods or whatever you want to call them. We have had to record a handful this offseason, which is so much better than what happened last offseason. I'm your host, Zach Worden, joined as always by Jori Negin-Shecter. And Jori, I know it's been a few hours since the news dropped, but Max Scherzer is going to be a Toronto Blue Jay. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling pretty good. I think it's a pretty exciting move. I think that in our previous episode, I expressed some cynicism about the deal, but based on the fallout of the move and what it seems like could be on the table in the next, dare I say, couple of days,
We'll have to be back
um,
again doing this.
we'll have to be back again doing this. It sounds like this is the Jays getting the green light to go spend, and Scherzer is step one. And it sounds like there is maybe step two and step three on the horizon.
Yeah, 1 year, 15.5 million, a little in your face to Justin Verlander, I'm sure, for Max Scherzer there, but 40 years old, coming off a season with the Rangers where he only threw 43 innings. He dealt with he was obviously coming off the back surgery last offseason. He had the year ended like two starts early, one start early with the hamstring strain. He had kind of some nerve damage, so obviously limited to nine starts last year. But I think what you're bringing him in for, you're not bringing in Cy Young Max Scherzer, right? Like this isn't 2019 anymore. We're in 2025, and for him to come into this rotation, like he's gonna be, you want to put a number on it, like he's probably the year three or year four or even year five, right? Like I think that they're bringing him in right now, and it looks that you probably hope for something like he did in 2023, where he threw 152 innings with a 3.77 ERA between the Mets and the Rangers, and that's probably a result that you're pretty happy with for 15.5 million at this point of the offseason.
That would be a more than acceptable outcome for him. I think that the bigger thing, obviously, is that he gives them that flexibility that I mentioned of kicking Yariel Rodriguez down to the bullpen. It,
Yeah.
subsequently improves that. And who knows if it becomes a six-man rotation where Yariel moves between high leverage guy and rotation arm and swingman and every other position that he could throw from. But at the end of the day, it's a move that makes the Jays better. And I know there's some talk about the potential inherent risk involved here. Obviously, you're signing a 40-year-old, and who knows what his production is going to be. But given that it's only a 1 year deal, I see almost no downside here.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things where it's like it's him or Jose Quintana, right? Like I don't think that there's a huge difference between what those guys will provide in the innings they're on the mound. Like maybe Quintana's a little bit more certain in throwing 120 innings or something like that, right? Like you probably feel a little more like certain's the right word that Quintana would give you a certain amount of innings where Scherzer, he's gonna have to prove it, but obviously he threw for teams. I believe it was earlier this week in Florida, and by the Mark Feinsand report, like it sounded like he looked good. So for a guy with this resume, I think you're pretty excited. I mean, we obviously haven't even touched on that, right? Like this is a first ballot Hall of Famer that's going to be wearing a Toronto Blue Jays jersey, and he's going to be selling jerseys. He's going to be selling tickets, right? Like, I mean, I'm sure, you're going to be Max Scherzer. Like, you got to go see him start at least once while he's in Toronto, right? Like, it's something that you're just
Yeah,
going to
for
have to
sure.
do.
That's a must, like 100%. I mean, I made a bet with our pal. I don't know if it made its way onto you. That if Scherzer's in Cy Young contention, which mind you, it was more to kind of say, let's maybe pump the brakes here. I said I would take him to a game, 100 level, where Scherzer's pitching. So, uh, I mean, we'll see if he's maybe at that level. I'd be very surprised if he was. I'd be very pleasantly surprised if he was. But needless to say, the hope and the goal is to get out there and see a future Hall of Famer pitch for the Toronto Blue Jays, because you mentioned it in the group chat before we hit the record button a couple hours back. This might be the second best pitcher in Blue Jays history. I would argue Doc maybe, but I mean, Roger Clemens is probably the best pitcher to ever pitch for the Blue Jays, thanks to a balanced breakfast, I'm sure. But outside of that, I'd say it's probably Scherzer, number two.
I mean, it's pretty close, right? Like, I mean, you can kind of dive into semantics of what you want from a pitcher, but Scherzer, three-time Cy Young winner, eight-time All-Star. Um, You know what I really love about this move that obviously, it comes with getting just Max Scherzer on your team, but like just the kind of the mentality that he brings. I know I tweeted out this video from after he won the Cy Young in 2016, and it was him and Rick Porcello on the MLB show where they interview the Cy Young winners, and they ask the same question, like what are your goals for 2017? And Rick Porcello's like, yeah, like I don't think a lot of pitchers have won 22 games, like I don't want to put the pressure on myself to get back to that level, like I just kind of want to be me and see if I can repeat that or whatever. And then they ask Scherzer the same question, and he's like, yeah, man, you know what, I want to get better, I want to find ways to get better. And you know what? I mean, you look at those years, and he did get better after that Cy Young year, right? And Rick Porcello kind of fell off the map after that. And I think that just kind of shows like the mentality of this guy. Like this guy just achieved the pinnacle of pitching in baseball, and he's like, nah, I can be better. So if there's a dude that you're gonna bet on like coming back from an injury and being able to kind of rub off on this clubhouse, like I think that Max Scherzer is going to be that guy. And the risk in it is that he gets hurt and isn't able to pitch that much, and then Yariel Rodriguez is right back in the rotation, and you're $15.5 million poorer.
Yeah, and I think about as well. It's not like the Jays have a particularly young rotation, so I don't know if there's particularly anybody that's he's gonna maybe rub off on, so to speak. But
Yeah.
maybe a Bowden Francis, maybe a Yariel Rodriguez, and the host of other guys that are going to be in spring training with the Blue Jays. They've got this group of young pitchers. Bloss, of course, is a guy. You bring back Cloth, even if he's on the older side. He's still only, I believe, 24, maybe turning 25 during the season. Got Ricky Tiedemann
Alec
continues to rehab.
Manoa.
Alec Manoa is a guy that could surely learn a thing or two. This is a team that's going to be able to get a lot out of Scherzer, even beyond his contributions on the field.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And obviously it's gonna be really cool to see him in the Blue Jays jersey. I do kind of want to get into like what we think it's gonna look like, because obviously he's not like the Max Scherzer that was throwing his fastball 60% of the time anymore. His secondary stuff was pretty good last year, and you can kind of quibble with reading into a 43 inning sample size. But one thing that I do think is kind of interesting for him, fitting in with this Blue Jays group is you kind of look at, you mentioned like that they're aging, right? Like Chris Bassett, Jose Barrios, Kevin Gossman, and those guys found success last year, with really wide arsenals and being able to throw a bunch of different pitches, right? So I wonder how Max Scherzer is going to come in and kind of fit into this, where the fastball, we'll see what the velocity is at like day one of spring training. But I think it's going to be kind of fun to see like what he and Pete Walker can kind of come up with for how he's going to attack hitters with however many, he's got the six different pitches or so, and just kind of see if he's going to kind of become like a Chris Bassett kitchen sink guy, or if he has kind of like this certain plan of how he wants to attack hitters. I think it you talk about like fit. I think as far as like what this rotation is good at, he seems like a guy who could really benefit from as much as they're going to learn from him, that he can learn from them as well.
Yeah, the thing you mentioned is the kitchen sink thing, and the fact that he has such a wide arsenal, and the fact that the Blue Jays have been able to have success with a guy like Chris Bassett in that role. And I even would say a guy like Barrios as well, to a lesser extent. He obviously has that slurve that he leans on heavily, but he still throws four pitches or so. And even though there's other guys that, a Gosman maybe only throws the fastball splitter, but he mixes in pitches every now and again. He's explored that in the past year or so. Like the Jays are a team that likes to have a wide arsenal. There's not a lot of Spencer Strider types that the Jays have not only had pitch for them, but have they developed. It's been a more of a case of guys that'll get you out with a number of things rather than having a specific tool in their toolkit to go after. The other thing I also want to touch on, which I hinted on at the beginning of the episode, and it's not necessarily Scherzer related, but I think it's tangentially so. We'd heard that Scherzer wanted to be convinced that whoever he was going to be competitive. And now we hear from Hector Gomez that things are progressing with Vladdy, and maybe there's some assurance that there's going to be opportunities to get Alonso. I mean, Shai Davidi comes on Sportsnet Central tonight, and uses the terminology basically saying if market opportunities present themselves, the Blue Jays will have the go ahead to go out and spend. I don't think they're done. I can't believe I'm saying this after the Santander stuff because I really did think they were done. I didn't see a universe where they crept into the 300 million range. I don't think that's an unfathomable thing to happen now.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at the whole Scherzer situation and you look at, if you're concerned about this team like being able to compete for a wild card spot or compete for a spot in the AL East or wherever you kind of see them slotting into the playoff picture, like if you're worried about them being in that spot. Like obviously Max Scherzer believes that they're going to be there, and like that's a guy who's seen a lot of really good baseball teams, whether it was in Washington, Detroit, or that one year with the Mets where they were really good, right? So, I think you like the idea because it had been whispered that like him and Alonso were packaged or they're good buddies, so maybe that does kind of lead to one thing leads to another, right? The Scherzer signing leads into Alonso. Hector Gomez, of course, tweets out after Scherzer signs, and he's like, more things are coming for the Blue Jays or stuff like that, right? And John Heyman, of course, the article comes out like right after the signing. He's like, "Is Pete Alonso a fit for the Reds?" And is like, "Well, like what's going on here because he is not a fit for the Reds. I mean, he would be like park wise, that would be really fun, but I just don't see the Reds forking out the amount of money that's gonna get you Pete Alonso.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is a Scott Boras flailing attempt to create that stalking horse as the terminology is so readily used. This episode of the Bird's Eye View podcast is brought to you by BioSteel. Use code Bird's Eye View at checkout for 20% off your order at biosteel.ca. Again, that's code Bird's Eye View at checkout for 20% off your order. For all your high performance hydration needs, visit biosteel.ca. Thank you again to BioSteel for sponsoring today's episode. I think that the biggest thing for me with this Scherzer thing is it's another instance where the Jays aren't the little brother, it feels like the Jays are a player. They're top five in payroll at this point. They're really going out there and they're attacking this last year of the Vlad and Bo window. And hopefully they're able to extend it. This talk about Bo not wanting to extend, I'm sure his tune would definitely change if the Jays won 95 games next year and made a deep run, maybe not even the World Series, but the division or the league championship series. So I think anything can change with one phone call. And I think that this Scherzer stuff gives me a sense of optimism that the Blue Jays are trending it's trending in a much better direction than they were, 6 weeks ago when they had just missed out on Corbin Burns and it seemed like it was over for the Blue Jays.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it and things have totally changed, right? You go from an offseason where it's like, where does this Andres Jimenez trade fit into your team in 2025? Like, it seems like you're doubling down. You're not adding any offense, and now we're in a spot where they've added Jimenez, they've added Santander, they've added Jimmy Garcia, they've added Jeff Hoffman, they've added Max Scherzer. Like, it has been an exciting offseason, and the idea that the jokes and the memes of the Blue Jays being the second place or the runner up, everything like that. I mean, even after this, I'm kind of saw people tweeting. They're like, "Oh, the Blue Jays finally got
Finally
someone."
got
I'm
a
like,
guy.
"Well,
They've
well,
been
they
getting
they've gotten
guys.
Santander
They've been getting
and
guys.
Hoffman, right?" So I think that you can kind of put that narrative to bed. And even if it was kind of an incorrect narrative originally, I mean, you look at it like sure you miss out on Burns and Soto, but like those are very, very unique situations, right? I don't think well, we know obviously you weren't getting Burns because he had a very set mindset on where he wanted to go. And Juan Soto, I mean, if the Blue Jays go to 810 million, maybe you get him,
Yeah,
which
that's a, such a
maybe they
such
should
a
have, maybe they should have,
that's
but
such a one-off scenario, right? Yeah, I
yeah.
just I think like I said, that this is a team that has found a bit of an identity and now we're heading into February and it's, I'm starting to get the itch. I'm kind of like let's get moving here, spring training.
I just like as far as like the offseason, like if you had to grade the offseason today, like not like let's say that it's done today, like what do you give it?
I'm thinking A minus. I know it's easy to give him an A because they filled all the spots, etc. I give him an A minus because obviously they didn't walk away with any of the big fish. Would have been really fun to walk away with one of those guys, but can't give them anything less than an A minus because even if they haven't, they've filled all the roles. They've signed relievers, they've signed a slugger, they've gone out and I mean there was a glut at second base, but no one there was really a second baseman in the conventional set of the definition. And Andres Jimenez immediately becomes a guy that fills that role beautifully, right? I mean, whether that contract ends up in albatross is yet to be seen, but regardless, they went out and they've improved, and now finally they've added to the rotation something that they had indicated they wanted to do for weeks and weeks and weeks on end.
Yeah.
Now, right now, I think that there's still room to get to that A, and I think there's room to get to the A plus. And there's one signature they need to put pen to
Yeah.
paper on with a certain homegrown superstar, and I think that would push them into that A plus plus range.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I mean, if you look at what they've done this offseason, and if you were to transport us back to like October 10th and say, hey, the Blue Jays opening day roster next year is going to include Max Scherzer, Jeff Hoffman, Anthony Santander, like you're probably feeling pretty good about that, before you go through the Soto, Sasaki, and Burns things. Like you hear that, you would probably be like, man, like that's going to be a much better baseball team than they were in 2024.
For
And,
sure.
whether it puts them into like contention for the division, I think, there's still too many question marks, right? Like the rotation is aging. As we saw last year, like even the best laid bullpen plans can flip. Like last year, we were entering the season thinking that the bullpen was probably going to be the most sure thing about them. And we obviously that's not how it turned out, very much not so. But when you look at it, I mean, you know what, I think that they've put themselves in a really good spot. And adding Pete Alonso, adding Alex Bregman, adding any of these hitters, I think would just be a huge win for them entering the year and pushing them maybe out of like the wild card picture and into kind of, you're trying to battle out for home field
The AL
advantage.
East is going to be a bloodbath next year, right? There
Yeah.
a single team in the AL East that is not compelling or could win it?
Yeah,
Like
it's crazy and you know what the thing is like there's question marks about them all too, right? Like the Yankees, you lose Soto, and they're kind of doing this
retirement tour.
retirement home thing. Yeah, it's but who knows? Like, I mean, I think that the guys that they brought in are pretty good fits. Like Bellinger helps clean up their outfield defense a little bit. They're still probably a few moves away. I mean, Fried is a really nice add. I think that's probably a really significant move for them. And then the Red Sox, obviously, they kind of are going to be dependent on what all their young guys do. The Orioles, like, what is their rotation going to look like? Can Grayson Rodriguez take the next step? Can Zach Eflin be good? Can their bullpen, is Felix Bautista healthy? Is Adley Rutschman able to return? Like that they have kind of all those questions, and then the Rays are the Rays, and they have all these arms coming back, but they did trade away some of their offensive pieces, so they all have questions. And I think you kind of look at the floors, like the Blue Jays floor probably is a little bit lower, but I think, man, like just a really good month of moves for the Blue Jays here to kind of get them back into the conversation. And you know what, honestly, if the Chicago White Sox weren't the worst baseball team you've ever seen in your life on paper, I would feel pretty confident about the Blue Jays, like kind of ranking ahead of some of those AL Central teams in the wild
For
card
sure,
race.
for sure. It's going to be really interesting just in general to see how things shake out in the AL because given the basically jump ball that is the AL East and given the AL West, even in some respects, is weakening, I think of a team like the Astros losing a guy like Kyle Tucker. And then you've got the AL Central who refuses to spend money. It's jump ball, baby.
Before we do kind of wrap up here, I want to get your thoughts on the Yariel Rodriguez thing, like you mentioned earlier. I think that's a huge point because this Scherzer thing not only does give you the addition to your rotation, but in theory, it does strengthen your bullpen because it seems like the most likely course of action will be pushing Yariel Rodriguez back to the bullpen, where he was so excellent as a leverage guy in Japan. I figure he probably slots in a little bit more as a long man here, but you figure his stuff is going to play up. and he's going to be able to be a little bit more effective in his time on the mound for the Blue Jays this year, whether that does come as a starter or kind of flipping between roles or just kind of serving as like that guy who does give you a bunch of innings in the middle of the game.
You want a hot take here? Yariel Rodriguez leads the Blue Jays in saves next year.
That
That's a
is
hot take
spicy.
for
That
you
is spicy.
because I think this guy absolutely could turn himself into a leverage arm for the Blue Jays next year. I think if the rotation stays healthy, which is a huge if, but if it stays healthy, then there's not as much of a need to stretch out Yariel Rodriguez. And if he has success in the bullpen, I think the upside there is maybe not quite alongside Hoffman. You figure Hoffman is your guy, but it only takes one injury and maybe turn Hoffman into your Superman, fireman leverage guy instead of making him your closer. And all of a sudden, Yariel Rodriguez maybe turns into that guy. I just think that there's opportunities for sure for him to be closing games. And I wouldn't be surprised if he collects at least half a dozen saves by the end of the year. And I wouldn't be surprised, well, be a little surprised, but I think it's a possibility that he could lead the team in saves.
Yeah, it would be really interesting for sure. Obviously, that was one thing that they worked on it with him last year was kind of expanding his arsenal, right? But if you allow him to be kind of slider heavy and maybe whatever splitter fastball or what else you kind of want to pair with that, like I mean that helps him kind of improve those pitches and focus on throwing his most effective pitches. So, I think
Well,
you
like
look at
they
his last year in Japan, he had a 1.15 ERA in 54
exactly.
innings
But the other
as
thing
as a
too,
leverage guy.
is that they've added all this pitching depth. You look again at the guys like Bloss, the guys like Lauer, the guys like Kloffenstein. You have other options here. So if Yariel Rodriguez has success in the bullpen, then why mess with it?
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think, you kind of line it up like starting the Blue Jay season. I think you start him in the bullpen. I think that's kind of where you set things up and you let Scherzer kind of show you that he's healthy to begin the year. Um, man, his first spring training start, like
Electric,
eyes
must
glued to
watch,
the TV. Like you have
must
got to be
watch.
watching that game. Like it's gonna
We'll
be
do.
so crazy.
We'll be doing an emergency pod after that episode. I'm sure.
Um, but yeah, I think you kind of look at it and you start the year with Yariel, you let Scherzer kind of come out and show you what he's going to at least start the year like. And if things do go poorly, you have the other routes there and the option. I'm sure they'll keep Yariel like fairly stretched out, but if Scherzer comes into the beginning of the year and he's throwing, 5, 6 inning starts and having success, I think you can probably slowly creep Yariel down that depth chart and try and get him into the Hoffman, Green, Garcia, Swanson group. And all of a sudden, it's like that's a pretty good group of guys there that you're able to throw it between the seventh and the ninth innings.
Amazing how adding one starter has suddenly just provided so much more clarity for this team.
Yeah.
Just a
And
total shift.
like that's kind of why I guess they've been doing it the whole time, right? And whether that was Burns or Freed or whichever pitcher you kind of want to attach
Sasaki,
them
any
to,
number.
Sasaki, yeah, exactly. And obviously it being Scherzer is really cool and excited to kind of see what he looks like. I guess before we go, I looking at the Blue Jays schedule to start next year, if you had to, kind of line up your starters to go up against the Orioles and then go in against the Nationals. I mean, you're got the first 5 games. What order are you running those guys out there?
I mean, you got to give Scherzer the Nats game. You got to figure. I'm probably going Gosman opening day. Probably going Barrios 2. Probably going Bassett 3. Try to get. Is it? It's they got 4 or they've got
They got
3 against
four
the.
against the Orioles and then
So I'm
3 against
giving.
the Nationals.
I'm probably giving Bowden game 4, and I'm probably giving Max Scherzer game 5 against the Nats.
I know I sent this in the group chat earlier. I was like, give Max Scherzer the opening day start. Um, Obviously, I don't think that'll happen. That would be that would be a little dramatic, I think. And Kevin Gausman has obviously probably earned that. He didn't get the opportunity to do that last year, but um, I think it's going to go either like one of two ways. I think either you give Scherzer one of the first 2 games. Like I think we could realistically see them run him out there in game 2 just because of the pedigree and everything like that. Or like you say, he gets game 5 because it is the Nationals, and that'll probably be something that's up to him. And ultimately, it doesn't really matter. But
I mean,
I would
listen,
figure that you would want your better
it's
pitchers to pitch against the Orioles.
it's exciting. It's a fun thing to think about. The Max Scherzer is a Toronto Blue Jay.
It is very fun. Again, three-time Cy Young winner, first ballot Hall of Famer, eight-time All-Star. Would be fun if he added an All-Star, an All-Star appearance in a Blue Jays jersey. Don't think that's going to happen. But last thing before we go, Max Scherzer prediction for you. Give me a innings pitched and an ERA prediction.
I'll give him a 3.9 ERA and I'll give him 130 innings.
I think that is right on the nose. I would probably go around the same, like 3.8 to 3.9, 130 to 140, and then he's coming out of the bullpen in the playoffs.
He's your high leverage reliever in the playoffs.
That would be fun. Oh well, that is something to dream on for sure. I'm very excited to see Max Scherzer, very excited to get this move done, and very excited to see what comes in the next few days for the Blue Jays as we gear up for spring training. It is almost baseball season, and this move only heightens the anticipation. That is going to do it for us here today at the Bird's Eye View podcast. Make sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons if you're watching on YouTube. You can find us there at the Bird's Eye View podcast. If you're listening along on the podcast provider of your choice, make sure to drop a follow and review. You can follow us all on Twitter. I'm at Worden_Zach. Jori is at J Negin-Shecter, and the pod is at BEV_pod. Thanks so much for listening.